Okay, so imagine the greatest city in the world, a massive, unbreakable fortress built by the best engineers anyone had ever seen.
Right.
Now imagine that city just vanishes. It gets swallowed by the earth, and for centuries it's just a rumor.
That's the story of Nineveh. A truly spectacular rise and an even more catastrophic fall.
So where was Nineveh
It
exactly?
was the capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. For centuries, this city was the definition of power. It was right there on the Tigris River in what is now modern-day Iraq.
And if you were living back then, you knew that was the center of the world.
Oh, absolutely.
And when we say fortress, we really mean it. This wasn't just some town with a wall around it.
No, not at all. The main urban center was circled by a 7.5-mile stretch of just colossal stone walls.
7.5 miles. That's like, what, running a marathon just to get around the outside?
Pretty much, the whole thing was built to defy destruction. Inside, they had huge temples, these beautiful gardens, and King Sennacherib's palace, which we know had at least 80 rooms. Every single part of it was designed to shout permanence and power.
And yet it fell. Before we get to how, we have to understand what made the Assyrians such a superpower in the first place.
Well, it was a combination of brilliant engineering and just brutal military efficiency.
Let's start with the engineering. The city itself.
Nineveh was way ahead of its time. To support a city that big, especially during a siege, you need a ton of water.
Which they managed with these incredible water systems, right?
Exactly. They built a whole complex network of canals and aqueducts. You can think of an aqueduct as like a man-made river perfectly angled to use gravity to bring fresh water from mountains miles away right into the city.
A truly staggering achievement for the time.
It allowed thousands of people to live there surrounded by desert with a reliable water source.
And that same level of tech wasn't just for building cities, it was for destroying them.
Right. The Assyrian soldiers were famous for their discipline, but their real secret weapon, the thing that changed the game on the battlefield, was iron.
Because everyone else was still using bronze.
For the most part, yeah. And that's a huge advantage. Bronze is much softer, it gets dull pretty quickly in a long fight. Iron is harder, it's more durable, you can sharpen it to a much finer edge.
So when two armies clashed, the Assyrian swords just broke the other guy's stuff.
Essentially, yeah. They overpowered and outlasted them. And they were also one of the first armies to really specialize. They didn't just have a mob of soldiers.
How did you units?
Specific units, archers, heavy infantry for frontline fighting, and these super fast horse-drawn chariots that could just smash through enemy lines.
And the engineers weren't just at home building aqueducts.
No, they traveled with the army. They were like military specialists. They'd build giant ramps to get over enemy walls, and they had these enormous battering rams, some so big they needed dozens of men to operate them, designed for one purpose,
Yeah.
smashing down gates.
So that combination of technology, organization, and just sheer terror.
It made them unstoppable. Their empire stretched all the way from Egypt to the Persian Gulf. And most of the time, their reputation did the work for them. People were just too scared to rebel.
But Nineveh was more than just a military base. At its peak, it also became sort of the intellectual heart of the ancient world.
It did, and that's where we get to a really fascinating figure in this story, King Ashurbanipal.
Right, because most rulers back then were just warriors.
Exactly. They were focused on hunting and conquest. But Ashurbanipal was different. He was one of the very few kings who actually knew how to read and write. Not just one language, but several.
And that passion changed everything.
It really did. He decided that knowledge was just as important as military might. So he launched one of the first organized efforts in history to preserve information. He sent his people everywhere to collect every important tablet and scroll they could find.
And this became the famous Library of Ashurbanipal.
A collection of over 30,000 clay tablets. And remember, these aren't paper books. They're heavy, inscribed pieces of clay.
All written in cuneiform. Could you explain that real quick?
Sure, cuneiform is a wedge-shaped writing system. You take a damp piece of clay and use a stylus, basically a pointed stick, to press these little wedge shapes into it.
And what was on these 30,000 tablets?
Everything. I mean, they weren't just tax records. They had texts on science, on medicine, detailed royal histories, religious myths, even star charts. It was a complete archive of their world.
And didn't they find one of the most famous stories ever written in there?
They did. The most complete version we have of the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories in human history. So this library gives us this incredible, clear window into their entire culture.
So let's recap. You have impenetrable walls, The best army, the best weapons, and this huge store of knowledge. Seems invincible. So, how does an empire that powerful start to fail?
Well, the cracks started to show from the inside. The problem wasn't an external threat, not at first. The empire had just gotten too big.
A victim of its own success.
Precisely. It was too large and complex to manage well. And all that terror they used to conquer people, it created a lot of resentment.
Right, because conquered people are never really loyal subjects.
Exactly. They were held down by force, and they hated paying the super high taxes that Nineveh demanded to fund its army and its building projects. So you've got high taxes, and you've got deep resentment. That's a recipe for unrest.
And at the same time, the leadership itself started to fall apart.
Yeah, after Ashurbanipal, things got messy. There were these violent struggles for the throne between different royals. A civil war, basically.
So while the generals are busy fighting each other in the capital,
They're not paying any attention to the borders. The military was turning on itself, and the edges of the empire became vulnerable.
and that instability was the opportunity all their enemies had been waiting for.
It was the perfect moment. They realized that Assyria was too strong for any one kingdom to take on. But together.
They might have a chance.
And that's when two key groups formed what we call the Great Alliance. You had the Babylonians to the south, who wanted to be the world's next superpower, and you had the Medes, who were these incredible horsemen from what is now Iran.
They signed a treaty, combined their armies, and pointed them right at Nineveh.
And after chipping away at the empire's edges, in 612 BCE, they finally arrived at the gates. The Great Siege began.
And this was a long, brutal fight.
Months long. The invaders' first move was simple. Cut off all the supplies. They blocked every trade route, so the food inside the city started running low. Starvation was becoming a real threat.
But the battle for the walls was raging nonstop.
Oh, yeah. The attackers built these huge siege towers to fire arrows down into the city. The Assyrians fought back, dropping heavy stones, shooting fire arrows to try and burn the wooden towers down.
For a while, the defenses were holding. But then came the turning point, something no one could have predicted.
Nature itself. Heavy seasonal rains came, and the Tigris River started to flood, rising way above its normal level.
And the walls, they weren't all stone, were they?
No, and that's the critical detail. The foundations and inner layers were often made of sun-dried mud bricks.
Which is fine in a dry climate.
Right, but when the river flooded, the water just soaked into the foundations of those unbaked bricks. They got waterlogged, soft, unstable.
And the city's greatest defense became its biggest weakness.
A huge section of the wall, hundreds of yards long, just collapsed into the water. It created this massive, unfixable gap.
The city was wide open.
The Allied armies poured through the breach. The siege became a street fight. The last Assyrian defenders were completely overwhelmed. They were exhausted, starving, and now hopelessly outnumbered.
And the invaders, they didn't just conquer the city.
They wanted to erase it. They looted everything of value, set fire to the palaces, and leveled the buildings. After 612 BCE, Nineveh was gone as a political center.
And the fall of the capital meant the end of the entire Assyrian Empire.
It was over. The Babylonians immediately took control, becoming the new dominant power in the region.
And Nineveh itself was just buried. For centuries, people forgot where it even was, until archaeologists in the 19th century started digging into these huge mounds of earth.
Can you imagine being them? Uncovering these massive stone statues, the famous winged bulls with human heads, the lamassu taller than two cars stacked on top of each other.
Discovering a whole lost civilization.
But the greatest discovery of all came from the fire that destroyed the city.
The ultimate irony.
Exactly. When the invaders burned Nineveh, they accidentally preserved Ashurbanipal's library.
How?
That intense heat essentially acted like a kiln. It baked the soft clay tablets, hardening them into permanent ceramic. If the city had just been abandoned, the tablets would have crumbled into dust over time.
So the act of destruction is the only reason we have this knowledge today. That fire saved those 30,000 tablets, letting us read their laws, their myths, their letters, and giving us this incredible insight into their world.
The story of Nineveh is, it's such a powerful lesson. It shows that even the strongest, most advanced empire can collapse, not from an outside enemy, but from its own internal weakness.
The walls can be strong, but if there's division inside, it doesn't matter.
Right, and what really stands out to me is that the massive iron weapons and the 7-mile walls all turned to dust. But the knowledge, recorded on humble clay tablets, survived the fire.
In the end, knowledge proved to be more durable than power.
So what truths from our own time do you think will outlast the things we're building today? That's something to think about.
See you next time.